Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs go on the road, playing the number one team in the country, and absolutely take care of business. And I think the biggest takeaway coming out of this football game, and I'll put my hand up, and a lot of Georgia fans kind of agreed with us in the comment section over the last couple of weeks. We were asking about, does Georgia have the difference makers in the front seven, specifically on the defensive line, to kind of look like the Georgia defenses that we've seen in the past? We got our answer Saturday night against Texas. I think the biggest takeaway you can have if you're a Georgia fan, I think that's the best offensive line that you'll see all year in Georgia. I mean, they absolutely whipped tail. And we've been saying this the last couple of weeks. Look, we know the talent's there on that defensive line. We want to kind of see it get put on the football field. In the brightest moment and the biggest moment of this Georgia Bulldog season, we certainly saw that. Want to get into, I think, some of the biggest takeaways. And I think we're clearly going to start on the defensive side of the football. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Georgia fans. It's been a blast talking this team going back to the offseason. The amount of Go Dogs, the support you guys show in the comment section, that stuff means the world to the boys. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, I'm going to start with the post-game interview on the football field for Kirby Smart. Electric. It would be the term I would use as well. I'm probably not going to be sleeping until 2 a.m., probably watching that back a couple of times. My biggest takeaway, Kirby Smart knows, like, back against the wall. Like, the country, the national media, for the first time in a really long time, seeming to doubt this Georgia football team. A Georgia football team coached by Kirby Smart with a chip on the shoulder. It's bad news for the rest of the country, and I think we saw that Saturday night against Texas. I'll give you the T-box here. Biggest takeaways coming out of this football game here.
No, and you started off. It's that defensive line finally came alive, and they dominated in the way that, again, you kind of knew they had it. Like, we've seen Jalen Walker play really good football, be a really, really disruptive pass rusher. Same for Michael Williams. Those two especially, they led the way. They were dominant. I mean, Kelvin Banks is about as good of a tackle as you'll see in the college football ranks. Both were beating him, not regularly necessarily, but they were beating him more than he was beating them. So, like, they got on him a little bit. I was really impressed with what they did. And it starts there. It's been a really, really weakness for Georgia, I would say, up to those point. And they played dominant ball this game.
I wouldn't even say it was like, I mean, they whipped tail for 4 quarters of that football game. Jalen Walker, like a guy we've been banging the table for going back to the offseason, there, as a pure pass rusher, I'm not sure if it gets much better than Jalen Walker. That kid's juice off the line of scrimmage, it's next level. There's not many first steps and get-offs that you see better than Jalen Walker. And I think what's so fascinating about him is the amount of different ways. I think, one, Glenn Schumann, Kirby Smart finally kind of figured out the best spot and best ways to use Jalen Walker, whether you're kind of pinning the ears back and getting off the edge, whether he's playing that quarterback spy role. He's fit in brilliantly to this Georgia defense, and also probably has taken a step in terms of defending the run. I thought another guy you probably should have mentioned is Damon Williams. Look, Kelvin Banks, that's a top 10 NFL draft pick in a couple months. Cam Williams has been playing very good football all year for Texas. They gave up only 23 pressures all season heading into this football game. They probably gave up 15 to 18 pressures in this football game alone from Georgia.
And Damon Wilson feels like a guy who really should be able to dominate as
he's coming on.
You see that quick, just his quickness off the ball. He's got a really good versatile set of moves. I thought played really good in his sparing reps last year. Obviously wasn't good enough in the run, but even there, you're starting to see him develop in the way you need to, putting the weight on, being the size I think Georgia wants their defensive ends to be. So again, that's what ultimately stood out is like, yeah, the secondary has taken a bit of a beating for the way they've played at times, but ultimately I think a lot of that has been emanating from their inability to rush the pass on a really consistent basis. I think today you saw them kind of play the way they'll need to play if they, again, you want to be those Georgia old defenses.
It's great because, like, last week against Mississippi State, which I think is one of the worst offensive lines you see in the SEC, they had 0 sacks and only 3 tackles for a loss. I don't have the official numbers in front of me here, but I would think it's double-digit negative plays that Georgia created on the defensive side of the football, and it really wasn't only the edge rushers. Like, I thought on the inside, guy like Christian Miller, he is starting to come on, and we say this all the time, like, Georgia just plays the best football when it comes into November. That's kind of what you're seeing from this defensive line. Second storyline for me, linebacker play. Alabama a couple weeks ago, we were sitting talking, breaking down that football game and said, Alabama got to the perimeter on this Georgia defense. That's very hard to do because you look at the linebackers that Kirby Smart brings into this Georgia defense. They're all sub 11 guys in the 100-meter. They all fly. We know they're physically gifted enough to go sideline to sideline. Maybe a little bit lost against Alabama. They're going up against a Coach Sark Texas offense that is brilliant at giving you some eye candy and kind of freezing second level defenders. CJ Allen, Raylan Wilson. I thought Chris Cole, he's going to be a really good linebacker. They'll over under 6 linebackers that's in that Georgia room right now that'll be playing in the NFL. I'm taking the over. It's an absolutely loaded room, but I think most importantly, they played that way Saturday night against Texas. Not only the defensive line, but I thought those backers played some really good football for Georgia.
And then the secondary, I think, kind of did their job too. And again, I think it was made a lot easier by what Georgia was doing in terms of disrupting yours. But they weren't taking many penalties. I think they were playing the ball pretty well in the air, weren't doing any, like, again, you saw some really bad moments, obviously, against Alabama. I don't think you saw many of those, like maybe a couple I can think of. But again, when that secondary has that defensive line going, I think they're perfectly capable of being a really good unit. And then you still see, obviously, Malachi Starks kind of taking games over. But the guy who I thought really stepped up was Aguero. I thought he played his best football by far as a Georgia Bulldog.
Yeah, the secondary played by far I think, so, again, probably going back to the Clemson game, that was the best the secondary has looked for Georgia. I think you're right. Like it really, and it's like every Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann defense we've talked about. Like it starts in the front seven. The whole defense is going to go the way the front seven goes. And if you think the goal for Kirby Smart and Georgia now is build off that performance, like if you can do what you just did for 4 quarters against the Texas offensive line, I think you can do it against anybody in the country. Now it's about doing it every single Saturday. At the end of the day, Dill, this Georgia defense in Texas, 259 total yards in this football game, only 27 rushing. They forced 4 turnovers, 2 of 15 on third downs. That is a brilliant stat line against the Texas offense that, one, has really good quarterback play, really good offensive line play, but I think most importantly is coached by one of the best offensive minds that we see in the country. That's the Georgia defense that we knew they were capable of, and we saw Saturday night. Now, flipping to the offensive side of the football, what was the second question mark we had about Georgia? One was, is that defensive line, do they have the game wreckers? We got our answer against that. How about the offensive line? How about Georgia running the football a little bit more consistently? Dill, that's why you brought Trevor Etienne to this Georgia program, to play in big moments like this. So let's be frank about it. Like when he has the football in his hands, it looks a little bit different. When he gets to the second level, he's making second level defenders miss. It's been tough sledding in terms of the consistency for this Georgia offensive line, especially without guys like Tate on the inside. No, Jared Wilson's been banged up as well. What's the recipe for Georgia to win a national championship? Play good defense, specifically in the front seven, and run the football. They won 2 straight national championships doing that. They did that today. If you can continue to build on that performance, especially on the ground, Georgia's team is one of the most dangerous teams in the country.
In their offense, I think, can generate more explosion from that rushing attack than probably what they were getting last year. Because we said it, I mean, Trevor Etienne is a guy, if you give him the space, he's really, really good at creating big runs. Not just like, again, like, do you maybe want to see him churn yards up better? And I thought he did it pretty good today, frankly, running hard, running behind his pads, not having those like 0-1 yard type game runs. I thought he played that way, but obviously when he gets to space, he can rip big ones. And that's something, again, I think Georgia's going to need to try to find some explosiveness on the ground because I'm not sure their pass game is ever going to hit that real explosive level right now. Again, unless something changed, Carson Beck still didn't totally look comfortable to me. They're going to need that rushing attack to be more explosive than probably what it's been so far. I think you started to see, again, their offensive line played probably the best I've seen them play this year, and they were able to generate a little bit of explosiveness. Not a tremendous amount, obviously, but that's something I think going forward, if they can do it, that'll kind of change. I think it'll help Carson Beck a lot. I think it'll certainly help that offense. And I
We're
think
gonna get into Carson Beck, but I think the biggest storyline is, look, everybody wants to talk about Quinn Ewers in the Texas offense. It's one of the best defenses in the country as well. There's a reason they were the number one team in the country heading into this football game. Dill, you said it best. Carson Beck, did he play his best football? Has Carson Beck looked like the Carson Beck that we saw in 2023? No, I think a lot of Georgia fans would certainly admit that. But if you can give him that ground game that you gave him against Texas, again, you're not going to see a better front seven for a while than what you just saw. A couple of things that I would note. One, you can still tell Carson Beck still trying to feel out like who are going to be my guys when in the big moments, right? It's hard to replace guys like Ladd and Brock. And I think a lot of Georgia fans recognize you don't have a Brock or Ladd walking into this locker room anytime soon. So there's still some growing pains in terms of who are my difference makers on the outside. I think most importantly, though, if you can continue to run the football like this and then work off play action, we all know Carson Beck's elite working off play action. They haven't really had the opportunity to go to play action because they've been struggling in the run game. Like we all know, when you can't run the football as effectively as you want, play action is not as effective. If you can get this run game going, continue to let Carson Beck work off some play action and continue to build the chemistry with some of these pass catchers, I think what's most exciting for Georgia fans, we know there's another level to this offense, specifically in the passing attack and Carson Beck. If you can continue to find that towards that month of November, going into the college football playoffs, this Georgia team becomes, again, just that more dangerous heading into the playoffs here.
Yeah, and that is kind of the recipe they're looking for. I think obviously coming into this year, you probably wanted the passing attack to just look better than it did, but it is what it is. I mean, Georgia's still always been able to prove that they don't necessarily need an elite downfield passing attack to be great. Not to say that can't kind of find its stride, because of what you said, there were a lot of new guys who kind of needed to step up. And again, you're still seeing those moments where like guys aren't on the same page and running routes and they're missing those like just minor timing things. But again, there's still a lot of talent in that group. You look, Lawson Lucky's starting to emerge. I think that's huge for Georgia to get that tight end rolling. Oscar Delp actually played his best football today. So again, those things I still think they're looking on getting. Dominic Lovett, I certainly think they'll want to get him more involved. It feels like him and Carson Beck haven't quite figured out like their rhythm, but there are paths to being a little bit better in the passing attack.
100%. We like, there's the weapons in this room, and again, I don't think it's the weapons you had last year, but there are still certainly weapons for Carson Beck to continue to develop with. And I guess my closing take is like there were some drops, there were some interceptions. You had a pass interference call that got I've never we've watched a lot of football. I've never seen a student. What is it? You got the students throwing beer bottles onto the football field. The refs convene. They take away the pass interference.
Feels like a dangerous precedent.
Yeah, that 100% does. There's a lot of teams that let it get off the rails at that point. Georgia didn't. And like Carson Beck had you've seen Carson Beck bounce back a couple times now, right? First half against Georgia or against Alabama, battled back. You saw him battle back again here. A lot of really positive takeaways for Georgia. I thought they answered, two of the biggest questions we had, specifically in the front seven of this defense. If you're a Georgia fan, like this team's dangerous, especially with the chip on the shoulder that it sounds like Kirby Smart and Georgia have. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.